Julian Cross stood in his penthouse, staring at the wedding invitation like it might catch fire in his hands. Serena Vale, the woman who had shattered him 2 years ago, was getting married, and she had the audacity to remind him of a promise he'd made when he was younger and stupider, that he'd attend her wedding no matter what. He could show up broken, or he could show up with someone who made Serena wonder if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. He picked up his phone and called the one person who'd never looked at him like he needed fixing. "Mara," he said, his voice rough, "I need you to do something for me." If you want to see how Julian faces the woman who destroyed him, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The invitation sat on Julian's desk for 3 days before he touched it again. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant script. "Serena Vale and Marcus Hathaway request the honor of your presence." He'd read it so many times the words had lost meaning, becoming just shapes on expensive paper that somehow still managed to feel like a knife between his ribs. His assistant, Mara Ellis, knocked twice and entered without waiting for permission. She'd worked for him for 18 months and had learned early that Julian didn't waste time with formalities. She carried a tablet and a coffee she'd picked up on her way in. Black? No sugar, the way he always drank it. "Morning meetings are stacked," she said, setting the cup on his desk. "The Goldman presentation moved to 10, and Patterson wants 15 minutes before that." Julian didn't answer. He was still looking at the invitation. Mara followed his gaze, then went quiet. She'd heard about Serena. Everyone in Julian's orbit had heard about Serena, though no one talked about her directly. She was the wound that didn't quite close, the reason Julian threw himself into work like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. "You going?" Mara asked. He looked up. Mara stood with one hip against his desk, her dark hair pulled back in a way that was professional but not severe. She had a face that was more interesting than beautiful, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it was always half a second away from saying something cutting. She wore black most days, simple and expensive, and never bothered with the performance other women in the office seemed to think was required. "I told her I would," Julian said. "Years ago, before everything. That was before she broke your heart." "She didn't break it," Julian said automatically. "She just shattered it into small, unrecognizable pieces?" Julian's mouth twitched despite himself. Mara had a way of saying the brutal truth like it was a weather report. It should have been irritating. Instead, it was one of the reasons he'd kept her around when other assistants had lasted 3 months at most. Something like that, he admitted. Mara set her tablet down and crossed her arms. "So don't go." "I gave my word." "Your word to a woman who chose someone else and still expects you to show up and watch her marry him? Julian, that's not honor. That's masochism." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You don't pull punches, do you? You don't pay me to pull punches. You pay me to keep your schedule running and tell you when you're about to do something stupid." She tilted her head. "This is stupid." Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If I don't go, she wins." "Wins what?" "The narrative. That I'm still broken. That losing her destroyed me." He looked at the invitation again. "I won't give her that." Mara watched him, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "So go. Show up looking like you've never been better. Make her wonder. And walk in alone? That'll really sell it? Then don't walk in alone." The words hung between them. Julian looked at her sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you bring someone who makes it look like you moved on a long time ago." Mara's voice was calm, matter of fact. "Someone who doesn't treat you like you're fragile. Someone who makes Serena look at you and realize she has no idea who you became after she left." Julian stared at her. "You. If you want." "Mara, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm offering." She picked up her tablet again. "It's a Saturday night. I don't have plans. And frankly, I'm curious what kind of woman sends a wedding invitation to her ex and expects him to show up with a smile." Julian felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was more like the first breath after being underwater too long. "You'd really do this?" "I'd really do this." "Why?" Mara looked at him for a long moment. "Because you're not the man she thinks you are. And I think she should see that." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of conference calls and contract negotiations. Julian tried not to think about the wedding, which meant he thought about it constantly. Mara didn't bring it up again, and neither did he, But the knowledge of what they'd agreed to sat between them like a third presence. On Thursday afternoon, she walked into his office and said, "We need to go over logistics." Julian glanced up from his laptop. "Logistics? For Saturday. What time should I meet you? Are we driving together? What's the dress code?" She had her phone out taking notes. "I'm assuming formal. Serena doesn't strike me as a casual wedding type." "You've never met Serena." "I've seen her picture. And I've heard you on the phone with her mother." Mara's expression was dry. "That woman plans everything like a military operation." Julian couldn't argue with that. Margaret Vale had opinions about everything from font choices to flower arrangements. He remembered Serena crying in his arms once, overwhelmed by her mother's expectations. He'd held her and promised her that when they got married, it would be whatever she wanted, small or large, traditional or unconventional. Just them. That promise felt like something from another lifetime now. "Black tie," he said, "and I'll pick you up, 6 o'clock. Mara made a note. "Address?" He told her. She nodded and started to leave, then paused at the door. "Julian?" "Yeah?" "You don't owe her anything. Not your presence, not your pain, not a single second of your time." Mara's voice was quiet but firm. "If you want to walk out of there 10 minutes in, we walk out. Understood?" Something in his throat went tight. "Understood." She left, and Julian sat in the sudden silence of his office, wondering when Mara had become the person who saw through every wall he'd built. Saturday arrived with unsettling speed. Julian spent the morning at the gym, trying to burn off the restless energy that had been building all week. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs shook, then stood under a cold shower until he felt something close to calm. By the time he put on his tuxedo, his hands were steady. The drive to Mara's apartment took 20 minutes. She lived in a renovated brownstone in a neighborhood that was artistic without being pretentious. Julian had been there once before, dropping off files when she'd been sick with the flu. He remembered bookshelves crammed with paperbacks, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee, and something herbal he couldn't identify. He texted when he arrived. Mara responded immediately, coming down. Julian waited, engine idling, and told himself this was just another business arrangement. Mara was doing him a favor. That was all. There was no reason for his pulse to be doing strange things. Then she walked out. The dress was deep red, almost burgundy, with a neckline that traced her collarbones and a skirt that moved like water. She'd left her hair down, dark waves falling past her shoulders. She wore almost no jewelry, just small gold earrings and a watch with a leather band. She looked elegant and confident and completely unlike anyone Julian had ever brought to an event before. She slid into the passenger seat and caught him staring. "What?" she said. "Too much?" "No, you look—" He stopped, searching for words that didn't sound like the kinds of things men said when they were trying to flatter. "You look like yourself." Mara's expression softened slightly. "Good. That's what I was going for." Julian pulled away from the curb, and they drove in silence for a few minutes. The venue was 40 minutes outside the city, a country estate with rolling lawns and trees strung with lights. Serena had always loved that kind of setting. Romantic and slightly unreal, like something out of a movie. "Nervous?" Mara asked. "No," Julian lied. She glanced at him. "You're gripping the steering wheel like it insulted your mother." He forced his hands to relax. "Maybe a little nervous. That's normal." "Is it?" "You're about to see your ex-fiancé marry someone else. If you weren't nervous, I'd be concerned." Mara turned slightly in her seat to face him. "Do you still love her?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Julian didn't answer right away. He thought about Serena's laugh, the way she used to fall asleep with her head on his chest, the morning she'd told him she needed space, and he'd watched his future dissolve in real time. "I don't know," he said finally. "I loved who she was, or who I thought she was. But the woman who sent that invitation, I don't think I know her anymore." "Then tonight's just theater," Mara said. "We walk in, we're gracious. We show her that you're fine, better than fine, and then we leave." "Just theater," Julian repeated. "Just theater." They pulled through the estate gates as the sun started to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Staff in crisp uniforms directed them to the parking area. Julian turned off the engine and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Mara's hand appeared on his arm, light but steady. "Hey," she said, "you've got this." Julian looked at her, really looked at her, and felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Thank you for being here." Thank you for asking. They got out of the car and Julian offered his arm. Mara took it without hesitation, her fingers resting just above his elbow. Together, they walked toward the sound of music and voices, toward the place where Julian's past and present were about to collide. The venue was more extravagant than Julian had expected, though he shouldn't have been surprised. The ceremony had taken place earlier. This was the reception, held in a vast tent with chandeliers and flowers that must have cost more than most people's cars. Guests milled about with champagne flutes, their laughter bright and performative. Julian felt Mara tense slightly beside him as they entered. Second thoughts? He murmured, just calculating how much this wedding cost and wondering if they're happy enough to justify it. Julian almost laughed. You're ruthless. I'm practical. Mara scanned the room with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Where's the bride? Julian! The voice came from behind them, and Julian felt his entire body go still. He turned. Serena stood 5 feet away, resplendent in white lace and silk. Her blonde hair was arranged in soft curls, her makeup flawless. She looked like a photograph of a bride, beautiful and remote. But her eyes were fixed on Mara. Serena, Julian said. His voice came out steady. Congratulations. Serena's gaze flicked to him briefly, then returned to Mara with undisguised curiosity. Thank you. I'm so glad you could make it. She took a step closer. And you are? Mara extended her hand, composed and unhurried. Mara Ellis. Pleasure to meet you. Mara, Serena repeated, as if testing the name. She shook Mara's hand, her smile polite and sharp. Julian didn't mention he was bringing someone. I don't recall him needing permission, Mara said lightly. There was a pause, just long enough to sting. Serena's smile tightened. Of course not. I just meant, it's good to see him moving forward. Her eyes moved between them, calculating. How long have you two been together? Julian opened his mouth, but Mara spoke first. Long enough to know he deserves someone who doesn't send wedding invitations like test questions, she said. Her tone was pleasant, even friendly, but the words landed like a slap. Serena's face went rigid. Around them, a few nearby guests had gone quiet, sensing the shift in energy. I didn't realize Julian needed someone to speak for him, Serena said, her voice cooling. He doesn't, but I don't need permission to call out games when I see them. Mara's smile didn't waver. Congratulations on your marriage. I'm sure it'll be everything you hoped for. Serena stared at her, and for a moment Julian saw something flicker in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or the first edge of uncertainty. Then she smoothed it away and turned to Julian. We should talk, she said, alone. I don't think that's necessary, Julian replied. Please, just for a moment. Mara squeezed his arm gently and said, I'll get us drinks. She walked away before Julian could protest, leaving him standing face to face with the woman who'd once been his entire world. Serena led him to a quieter corner of the tent, away from the crowd. When she turned to face him, her composure had cracked just slightly. Who is she really? Serena asked. I told you, Mara. Julian, don't play games with me. You bring some woman I've never heard of to my wedding, and she talks to me like so. Serena stopped, catching herself. I just want to know if you're happy. Do you? Julian asked. Or do you want to know if I'm still broken? Serena flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? You invited me here, Serena. You knew what you were doing. I invited you because I wanted you to see that I'm okay, that we both moved on. Then why do you care who I brought? Serena didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, and Julian saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. Regret, maybe, or something close to it. I thought you'd come alone, she said quietly. I thought you'd still be destroyed? Healing. Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am healing. That's what tonight is. Serena reached for his hand, and Julian stepped back before she could touch him. I should get back to Mara, he said. Julian, enjoy your wedding, Serena. He walked away without looking back, his heart pounding against his ribs. He found Mara near the bar, 2 champagne flutes in her hands. She handed him one without a word. You okay? She asked. Getting there. She studied his face, then said, Let's find our table. If we're going to survive this, we might as well sit down. Their assigned seats were at a table near the dance floor, surrounded by people Julian vaguely recognized from Serena's social circle. They all smiled at him with varying degrees of pity or curiosity, and Julian felt the familiar weight of being watched, evaluated, judged. Mara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She made small talk with the other guests effortlessly, deflecting intrusive questions about how she and Julian met with vague, charming answers that gave away nothing. Dinner was served, a parade of courses that Julian barely tasted. He was too aware of Serena across the room, too conscious of the way people kept glancing between them. Then the music started. The first dance was traditional, Serena and Marcus swaying in the center of the floor, while everyone watched and applauded. Julian kept his expression neutral, but his jaw was tight. Mara leaned in close, her voice low. "You're grinding your teeth." "I'm fine." "You're really not." The song ended, and the DJ invited other couples to join. Around them, guests began moving toward the dance floor. Julian looked at Mara. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Mara set down her glass and stood, offering her hand. "Let's go." They moved onto the floor together, and Julian took her hand in his other hand settling at her waist. Mara's fingers rested lightly on his shoulder. They began to move, and Julian was surprised by how naturally they fell into rhythm with each other. "I didn't know you could dance," Mara said. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was 16. I hated every second." "You don't dance like you hate it." Julian realized she was right. With Mara, it didn't feel like performance. It felt easy. They turned, and Julian caught sight of Serena watching them from the edge of the floor. Her expression was unreadable, but her husband was speaking to her, and she wasn't listening. She was staring at Julian and Mara like she was seeing something she couldn't quite believe. "She's watching us," Mara murmured. "I know." "Does that bother you?" Julian looked down at Mara, at the curve of her mouth, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she held herself like nothing in the world could shake her. "No," he said. "It doesn't." Something shifted in Mara's expression. They were standing closer now, close enough that Julian could smell her perfume, something subtle and warm. Her hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. "Julian?" she said softly. "Yeah?" "This doesn't feel like theater anymore." He knew what she meant. The air between them had changed. What had started as performance was becoming something else, something real and undeniable. "No," Julian agreed. "It doesn't." They kept dancing, the rest of the room fading into background noise. For the first time in 2 years, Julian felt like he could breathe without the weight of the past crushing his chest. When the song ended, applause rippled through the tent. Julian and Mara stood still for a moment, neither of them quite ready to let go. Then Julian became aware of the attention on them, guests watching, whispering, noticing the way he and Mara had looked at each other, and Serena, standing frozen near her table, her face pale. Julian stepped back, releasing Mara's hand. "Let's get some air," he said quietly. They walked outside into the garden, where the night was cool and the noise of the reception muted. String lights illuminated the pathways, casting soft shadows. "That was intense," Mara said. "Yeah." "Julian?" His phone buzzed. He pulled it out and his stomach dropped. A text from an unknown number. "Stay away from him. He's not yours to fix." "What is it?" Mara asked. Julian showed her the message. Mara's expression went cold. "That's her, isn't it?" "Has to be." Mara took his phone and typed a reply before he could stop her. "He's not a possession, and he doesn't need fixing." She hit send and handed the phone back. "If she wants to play games, I'll play." Julian stared at her. "Mara, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Mara's voice was firm. "Because whatever we're pretending this is, I'm not going to stand by and let her threaten you. Or me." Julian felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away for a long time. He reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "You're incredible," he said. Mara's breath hitched. "Julian." The moment shattered as footsteps approached. They turned to see Marcus, Serena's new husband, walking toward them with an apologetic expression. "Sorry to interrupt," Marcus said. "Serena asked me to find you. She wants to talk." "Tell her we're done talking," Julian said. Marcus hesitated. "Look, I know this is awkward, but she's upset. Can you just—" "No," Mara said firmly. "Whatever Serena's feeling right now, that's not Julian's responsibility. It's yours." Marcus blinked, taken aback. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll tell her." He left, and Julian and Mara stood in the quiet garden, the weight of the evening settling around them. "We should go," Julian said. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I think I've seen enough." They walked back through the venue, saying polite goodbyes to the few people who noticed them leaving. Serena was nowhere to be seen. In the car, the silence felt different, charged with all the things they hadn't said. Julian drove Mara back to her apartment, and when he pulled up outside, neither of them moved to get out. "Thank you," Julian said finally. "For tonight. For all of it." "You don't have to thank me." "I do. You didn't just stand beside me, Mara. You stood up for me. No one's done that in a long time." Mara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Julian, whatever this is between us, I know. We don't have to define it right now." He reached over and took her hand. "But I need you to know that tonight wasn't fake for me. Not by the end." Mara's fingers threaded through his. "It wasn't fake for me either." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, something fragile and new growing in the space between them. Finally, Mara pulled away gently. "Good night, Julian." "Good night." She got out of the car and walked to her door, glancing back once before disappearing inside. Julian sat in the darkness, his heart pounding, and knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed. Julian didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening frame by frame. The way Mara had looked in that red dress. The steadiness in her voice when she'd faced down Serena. The moment on the dance floor when everything had stopped feeling like pretend. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. No more threatening texts. No calls from Serena. Just the hollow quiet of his penthouse and the persistent feeling that something fundamental had shifted beneath his feet. By the time dawn broke over the city, Julian had given up on sleep entirely. He made coffee and stood at the window watching the streets come alive below, trying to sort through the mess in his head. He'd spent 2 years building walls, keeping people at arm's length, telling himself that what Serena had done was proof that letting someone in only ended in wreckage. And then Mara had walked into his life, not as someone trying to heal him or fix him, but as someone who simply saw him clearly and didn't flinch. That was more dangerous than anything Serena had ever done to him. His phone buzzed and Julian's pulse jumped. But it wasn't Mara. It was his brother David. "Heard you went to the wedding. You okay?" Julian typed back, "Fine. How'd you hear?" Mom called. "Apparently Margaret Vale told her you brought a date." Mom's losing her mind with curiosity. Julian grimaced. His mother had loved Serena, had spent months after the breakup dropping hints about reconciliation and second chances. The idea of explaining Mara to her felt exhausting. "Tell Mom I'll call her later. She wants details." "Who is she? How long have you been seeing her?" "Is it serious?" Julian stared at the questions and had no idea how to answer them. Was it serious? 24 hours ago, Mara had been his assistant. Now she was the person he couldn't stop thinking about, the one whose hand he'd held like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the ground. "I don't know yet," he typed. "It's complicated." David's response came immediately. "It's always complicated with you. Just don't screw it up." Julian set the phone down and drank his coffee, the bitter taste doing nothing to settle the unease in his stomach. The office on Monday felt surreal. Julian arrived early, the way he always did, and went through emails with mechanical efficiency. When Mara walked in at 8:30 with his usual coffee and her tablet, they both hesitated. "Morning," she said carefully. "Morning." Mara set the coffee on his desk and stood there, clearly waiting for him to say something. Julian's mind went blank. "So," Mara said finally, "that was a weekend." "Yeah. We should probably talk about it." "Probably." But neither of them moved. The air between them felt charged, fragile, like one wrong word could break whatever had started to form Saturday night. Mara sat down across from him, and Julian noticed she looked tired, shadows under her eyes, hair pulled back in a way that was more functional than styled. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Not much. You?" "No?" They looked at each other, and Julian felt the same pull he'd felt on the dance floor. The need to close the distance, to stop pretending this was just business. "I keep thinking about what you said," Mara began, "in the car, that it wasn't fake for you." "It wasn't." "Julian, I need you to understand something." Mara's voice was steady, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't agree to go with you because I wanted to get closer to you. I did it because you needed someone, and I could help. But somewhere during that night, it stopped being about helping, and I don't know what to do with that." Julian leaned forward. "What do you want to do with it?" "I don't know. You're my boss. This is my job. If we cross that line and it goes wrong..." She stopped, searching for words. "I've worked hard to get where I am. I can't afford to lose this position because we got confused about what Saturday was." You think I'm confused? I think we both might be. Julian stood and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from her chair. Mara tilted her head up to look at him, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. I'm not confused, he said quietly. I'm terrified. Because for the first time in 2 years, I want something other than work, and that something is you. Mara's breath caught. Julian, you don't have to say anything right now. I just need you to know that whatever happens next, it's not about Saturday being some game or performance. It's about the fact that you're the first person who's made me feel like I'm not just surviving. Mara stood slowly, closing the distance between them until they were inches apart. You're asking me to risk everything. I know. If this falls apart, then we'll deal with it. But Mara, I can't go back to pretending I don't feel this. For a long moment, they just stood there, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Then Mara reached out and touched his chest lightly, her palm resting over his heart. Okay, she said softly, but we do this carefully. No rushing, no making promises we can't keep. Carefully, Julian agreed. And if it gets complicated, we talk. No shutting down, no running away. No running away. Mara's hand moved up to his jaw, and Julian felt his entire body respond to the touch. One more thing. What? If Serena tries anything else, you tell me immediately. I meant what I said Saturday. She doesn't get to mess with you anymore. Julian caught her wrist gently, keeping her hand against his face. You really don't back down, do you? Not when it matters. He kissed her palm, and Mara's eyes went dark. They were standing too close, breathing the same air, and Julian knew if he kissed her properly right now, there would be no going back. So he stepped back, giving them both space to breathe. We should get to work, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Mara nodded, though she looked as unsteady as he felt. Right, work. She gestured vaguely at the door. I'll be at my desk. She left, and Julian stood in the silence of his office, his heart pounding like he'd just run a marathon. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Julian and Mara worked together the way they always had, efficient, professional, in sync. But now there was an undercurrent of awareness that made every interaction feel loaded. A hand brushing against his when she passed him a file. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The careful distance they maintained, as if both of them knew how easily it could collapse. Julian's mother called Wednesday evening, her voice bright with curiosity. Darling, Margaret tells me you brought someone to Serena's wedding. Why didn't you mention you were seeing someone? Julian pinched the bridge of his nose. It's new, Mom. I wasn't sure it was worth mentioning yet. Well, Margaret said she was striking, dark hair, very poised, not at all like Serena. No, not like Serena. Is it serious? Julian thought about Mara's hand in his, the way she'd stood up to Serena without hesitation, the quiet conversation in his office where they'd both admitted this was real. It might be, he said. His mother made a pleased sound. Good. You deserve someone who sees you, Julian, not someone who tries to reshape you into what they want. Julian felt something twist in his chest. That's what Serena did, wasn't it? I never said that while you were together. But you thought it. His mother was quiet for a moment. I thought she didn't understand how much you were capable of feeling. She wanted you softer, more manageable. But you were never meant to be manageable, sweetheart. You were meant to be with someone strong enough to handle all of you. Julian closed his eyes. I don't know if I know how to do that anymore. Then learn. With someone who's worth learning for. They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. Julian sat with the phone in his hand, his mother's words echoing in his head. Thursday afternoon, everything changed again. Mara knocked on his door just after 3, and when Julian looked up, he saw the tension in her shoulders. What's wrong? She held up her phone. I got another message. Julian's jaw tightened. From Serena? Different number, but same tone. Mara read from the screen. You're a placeholder. He'll never love you the way he loved her. Julian stood abruptly. Let me see. Mara handed over the phone. Julian stared at the message, rage building in his chest. This wasn't just jealousy anymore. This was targeted, deliberate cruelty. He pulled out his own phone and dialed Serena's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Julian? She sounded breathless, surprised. You need to stop. Stop what? The messages, the games, whatever the hell you think you're doing. Julian's voice was cold.
Mara has nothing to do with what happened between us. Leave her out of it. There was a pause, then Serena said, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. You sent a text Saturday night, and now Mara's getting messages telling her she's a placeholder. If you can't handle the fact that I moved on, that's your problem. But you don't get to take it out on her. Julian? Serena's voice cracked slightly. I'm not sending any messages, I swear. Then who is? I don't know. Maybe... She stopped. Look, I'll talk to Marcus. Maybe one of his friends thinks they're being helpful or something. I didn't ask anyone to do this. Then make it stop. I will. I promise. Serena hesitated. Julian, I'm sorry. About Saturday. About all of it. I didn't think... No, you didn't. Julian hung up before she could say anything else. Mara was watching him, her expression unreadable. You believe her? I don't know. Maybe. Julian ran a hand through his hair. But whether she's sending them or not, this needs to end. And if it doesn't, then we go to the police. Harassment is harassment, regardless of who's behind it. Mara nodded, but Julian could see the unease in her eyes. This was exactly the kind of complication she'd been afraid of, the past bleeding into the present, making everything messy. Hey, he said gently, talk to me. I knew this wouldn't be simple, but I didn't think it would get hostile this fast. Mara sat down heavily in one of his office chairs. She really can't let you go, can she? Apparently not. Do you wish you'd never gone to the wedding? Julian considered the question. If he'd stayed home, he would have avoided this mess. But he also wouldn't have danced with Mara, wouldn't have seen the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching, wouldn't have started down this path that felt simultaneously terrifying and right. No, he said. I don't wish that. Mara looked up at him. Even with all this? Even with all this. Julian crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair so they were eye level. Mara, I meant what I said. I'm not running away from this. From you. If Serena wants to make things difficult, we'll handle it. Together. Mara reached out and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. You're too good at saying the right thing. I'm just telling you the truth. That's what scares me, because I'm starting to believe you. Julian caught her hand and kissed her knuckles. Good. They stayed like that for a moment, the office around them forgotten. Then Mara's phone buzzed again, and they both tensed. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. What? Julian demanded. Mara turned the phone toward him. The message read, You should be more careful where you park at night. Julian felt ice flood his veins. That's a threat. Yeah. Where do you park? Street parking, a few blocks from my apartment. Mara's voice was tight. Julian, this is getting serious. I know. Julian stood and pulled out his phone. I'm calling my head of security. He'll arrange someone to watch your building. You can't just... Yes, I can, and I will. Julian's tone left no room for argument. Until we figure out who's doing this, you're not walking around unprotected. Mara looked like she wanted to protest, but something in his expression stopped her. Okay. Thank you. Julian made the call, giving instructions in clipped sentences. When he hung up, Mara was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He said. You go into a different mode when you're protecting something. It's like watching a switch flip. Is that a bad thing? No, it's just intense. Julian sat down beside her, exhaustion suddenly catching up with him. I'm sorry you're caught up in this. I'm not sorry. He looked at her sharply. Mara, I'm not, she repeated. This is ugly and complicated and probably going to get worse before it gets better. But I'm still not sorry. Because being with you, even with all of this, feels more real than anything I've done in years. Julian felt something crack open in his chest. He pulled her closer, and Mara came willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. We're going to figure this out, he said quietly. I know. They sat in his office as the afternoon light faded, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a world that kept shifting beneath their feet. That evening, Julian insisted on driving Mara home. His security team had already stationed someone near her building, a professional in an unmarked car who would keep watch overnight. This feels excessive, Mara said as they pulled up to her apartment. It's necessary. She didn't argue, which told Julian she was more shaken than she wanted to admit.
He walked her to her door, scanning the street with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent too long looking over his shoulder. "Will you call me if anything happens?" he asked. "Anything at all, even if it seems minor." "I will." Julian hesitated, not wanting to leave. Mara saw it and touched his arm. "I'll be fine. You have someone watching the building." "I know, I just—" He stopped, searching for words. "I don't like the idea of you being alone right now." Mara's expression softened. "Julian, if you're worried, you could stay." The offer hung between them, weighted with possibility. "I don't want to assume—" "You're not assuming. I'm offering." Mara unlocked her door and turned back to look at him. "We said we'd be careful. That doesn't mean we have to be apart." Julian followed her inside, and Mara closed the door behind them. Her apartment was exactly as he remembered. Books everywhere, warm lighting, the faint scent of coffee, and something herbal. It felt like a place where someone actually lived, not just existed. "Make yourself comfortable," Mara said, hanging up her coat. "I'm going to change into something less corporate." She disappeared into the bedroom, and Julian stood in the living room feeling strangely out of place. He'd been in boardrooms and penthouses and countries where he didn't speak the language, but Mara's apartment made him feel like he was stepping into something intimate and unfamiliar. She came back wearing soft pants and an oversized sweater, her hair down. She looked younger like this, less guarded. "Wine?" she offered. "Please." They sat on her couch with glasses of red wine, the silence between them comfortable in a way that surprised Julian. He'd spent so long associating quiet with loneliness that he'd forgotten it could feel like this. Peaceful, shared. "Can I ask you something?" Mara said after a while. "Anything." "When you were with Serena, were you happy?" Julian considered this question carefully. "I thought I was. But looking back, I think I was happy with the idea of her, the future we were supposed to have. I'm not sure I was happy with who we actually were together." "What do you mean?" "She wanted me softer, more available, less consumed by work." Julian swirled the wine in his glass. "And I tried. I really tried. But it always felt like I was performing some version of myself that wasn't quite real." "Did you tell her that?" "I tried. But every time I pushed back, she'd get upset, say I wasn't making her a priority, that if I really loved her, I'd change." Julian's jaw tightened. After a while, I started to believe her. That I was the problem, that I was too much or not enough, or fundamentally broken in some way. Mara set down her wine and shifted to face him fully. "You weren't broken. You were just with someone who wanted to rebuild you instead of understanding you." "How do you know?" "Because I've worked with you for over a year. I've seen you under pressure, exhausted, angry, frustrated. And not once have I thought you needed to be different, just yourself." Julian felt his throat go tight. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. It's just not easy." Mara reached for his hand. "Julian, when you're with the right person, you don't have to edit yourself. You just exist, and that's enough." "Is that what this is? With us?" Mara's thumb traced circles on his palm. "I don't know yet, but I think it could be." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, not needing to fill the silence with words. Eventually, Julian shifted closer, and Mara leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Thank you," Julian said quietly. "For what?" "For not trying to fix me." Mara tilted her head to look up at him. "There's nothing to fix." Julian kissed her forehead gently, and Mara's eyes fluttered closed. They stayed tangled together on the couch until exhaustion finally caught up with both of them, the world outside forgotten for a few precious hours. Julian woke sometime in the early morning to find himself still on Mara's couch, a blanket draped over them that he didn't remember being there before. Mara was curled against him, breathing softly, and Julian realized with sudden clarity that this was what he'd been missing. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just this. Waking up next to someone who made him feel like he didn't have to be anyone other than who he was. His phone buzzed, and Julian carefully extracted it from his pocket without waking Mara. A text from his security team. "No activity overnight, all clear." Julian typed back a quick thanks and set the phone aside. He looked down at Mara, at the way her hair fell across her face, the slight furrow between her brows even in sleep. He was falling for her. Maybe had already fallen, and that should have terrified him, but instead it just felt inevitable. Mara stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She blinked up at him, momentarily disoriented, then seemed to remember where they were. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning. Did we sleep here all night?" "Looks like it." Mara sat up, wincing slightly. "My neck is going to hate me for this." Julian stood and offered his hand. "Come on, let me make you breakfast." "You cook?" "I make excellent scrambled eggs. Everything else is questionable." Mara laughed, and the sound filled something hollow in Julian's chest. They moved into her small kitchen, and Julian found his way around with surprising ease. Mara sat at the counter watching him work, her expression soft. "This is weird," she said. "Weird how?" "Good weird, like we've done this 100 times before." Julian plated the eggs and slid one across to her. "Maybe we have. In some other version of things." "You believe in that? Other versions?" "I don't know. But I like the idea that somewhere we got this right from the beginning." They ate in comfortable silence, and Julian found himself thinking about what came next. They couldn't hide in Mara's apartment forever. Eventually, they'd have to face the office, his family, the questions and speculation that would come with them being together. And Serena. Whatever was happening with her, whether she was behind the messages or not, it wasn't over. But sitting across from Mara in the morning light, watching her steal bacon off his plate with a completely unapologetic expression, Julian felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The hope lasted exactly 3 days. Julian drove Mara to work that morning, both of them pretending it was about security and not about the fact that neither wanted to let go of what had happened the night before. They kept a careful distance in the office, professional and controlled, but Julian caught himself watching her through the glass walls of his office more than once. By Tuesday, the whispers had started. Julian's assistant dating someone was one thing. Julian's assistant sleeping at his apartment, or him at hers, the details were murky and multiplying, was another. People talked in break rooms and sent speculative emails. Julian ignored all of it, and Mara handled it with her usual unflappable composure. Wednesday afternoon, everything unraveled. Julian was in a meeting with their legal team when his phone lit up with a call from Mara. He normally wouldn't have answered, but something about the timing made him excuse himself and step into the hallway. "What's wrong?" Mara's voice was tight. "I'm at my car. Someone slashed my tires, all 4 of them." Julian felt rage flood through him, cold and precise. "Where are you exactly?" "Parking garage, level 3. "Stay there. Don't go anywhere alone. I'm coming now." He ended the call and walked back into the conference room long enough to say, "We're done for today. Reschedule." His tone left no room for questions. The parking garage was dim and nearly empty at this hour. Julian found Mara standing beside her sedan, arms crossed, staring at the wreckage. All 4 tires were shredded, cut with something sharp and deliberate. "Security footage?" Julian asked. "And I already asked. The cameras on this level have been out for maintenance since Monday." Mara's voice was flat, controlled. "Convenient." Julian pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "I need someone at my office, now, and get me the contact for whoever handles the garage security. I want to know how cameras stay broken for 3 days in a building like this." He hung up and turned to Mara. She looked steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched. "This is escalating," she said quietly. "I know." "Julian, maybe we should—" "Don't." His voice came out sharper than he intended. "Don't say we should stop. That's exactly what whoever's doing this wants." "I wasn't going to say that." Mara met his eyes. "I was going to say maybe we should go to the police now, not wait for it to get worse." Julian felt some of the tension leave his chest. "Yeah, we should." They filed a report that evening at the nearest precinct. The officer who took their statement was professional but not particularly optimistic. Without clear evidence of who was responsible, there wasn't much they could do beyond documenting the incidents. Julian left his contact information and made it clear he expected to be updated on any developments. "That felt pointless," Mara said as they walked back to Julian's car. "It creates a record. If this keeps escalating, we'll need it." Julian unlocked the doors and they both got in. "You're staying with me tonight." "Julian, it's not a request. Someone knows where you live, where you work, where you park. Until we figure out who's behind this, I'm not letting you go back to your apartment alone." Mara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, but I need to pick up some things first." They drove to her apartment with the security detail following behind. Julian waited while Mara packed a bag, his eyes constantly scanning the street outside. Everything felt like a potential threat now, cars parked too long, people walking too slowly, shadows that moved wrong. When they got to Julian's penthouse, Mara set her bag down and looked around with an expression Julian couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. It's just very you." "Is that good or bad?" "It's good. Clean, expensive, a little bit lonely." She turned to face him. "Do you actually spend time here, or do you just sleep here between work?" Julian felt the observation land like a punch. "I work a lot." "That's not an answer." "I sleep here. Sometimes I eat here. Mostly I work." Mara walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it was productive or necessary, just because it made you happy." Julian had to think about it, and the fact that he had to think about it was answer enough. "I don't know," he admitted. Mara turned back to him. "That's what she did to you, Serena. She made you think that wanting things for yourself was selfish, that your happiness was less important than being what she needed. You didn't know her." "I don't need to. I can see what she left behind." Julian walked over to stand beside her at the window. The city stretched out below them, thousands of lights in the darkness. "I used to paint." Mara looked at him in surprise. "What?" "Before law school, before the company, I painted. Nothing professional, just for myself. Landscapes, mostly. My mother still has a few hanging in her house." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Serena hated them. Said they took up too much space, made too much mess. After we got engaged, I stopped." "Do you miss it?" "I don't know. I haven't thought about it in years." Mara's hand found his. "Maybe you should start again." "Maybe." Julian squeezed her fingers gently. "Stay here as long as you need to. I'll set you up in the guest room." "Julian," Mara's voice was soft. "I don't want the guest room." He looked at her sharply, and Mara held his gaze without flinching. "We're already in this," she said, "all the way in. Pretending otherwise doesn't protect either of us." Julian felt his heart hammer against his ribs. "Are you sure?" "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." He pulled her closer, and Mara came willingly, her arms sliding around his waist. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of his too-empty apartment, and Julian felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. The next morning, Julian woke to find Mara already up, standing in his kitchen making coffee in one of his old Columbia t-shirts. She looked rumpled and real, and something about the sight made Julian's chest ache. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "Better than I have in weeks." Mara poured him a cup and slid it across the counter. "Your bed is obscenely comfortable. I might never leave." "I'm okay with that." She smiled, but it faded quickly. "We need to talk about work." "I know. People are going to notice we came in together." "Let them notice." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You're really okay with that? The speculation? The gossip?" "I'm done hiding." Julian came around the counter to stand beside her. "I spent 2 years making myself smaller because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I'm not doing that anymore, especially not with you. What if it affects your reputation? The board can deal with it. Mara, you're not some scandal. He stopped, searching for the right words. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. I'm not going to act like that's something to be ashamed of." Mara set down her coffee and kissed him, slow and deliberate. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "Okay," she said, "then let's go to work." They arrived at the office together, and Julian didn't miss the looks from the staff in the lobby. By the time they reached their floor, he knew word would be spreading through the building like wildfire. He didn't care. What he did care about was the email waiting in his inbox when he sat down at his desk. The sender was listed as anonymous. The subject line read, "You should know the truth." Julian's stomach dropped. He opened it. The email contained a single attachment, a photo taken outside Mara's apartment building. It showed Julian and Mara kissing on her doorstep 2 nights ago, the angle suggesting someone had been watching from across the street. Below the image, a single line of text. "Everyone will see what you're really doing. Sleeping your way to the top isn't as easy as it looks." Julian felt his vision narrow. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was targeted, calculated destruction. Someone was building a narrative designed to damage both of them, Mara especially. He forwarded the email to his security team and then called Mara into his office. When she walked in, he turned his laptop toward her without saying anything. Mara read the email, her face going pale. They were watching us. Yeah,
Julian, this is... She stopped, her hands shaking slightly. They're going to send this to people. Make it look like I'm using you to get ahead. No one who matters will believe that. You don't know that. You're the CEO. I'm your assistant. It's the oldest story in the book. Mara's voice was rising, panic bleeding through her usual composure. This could destroy my career, everything I've worked for. Julian stood and took her hands. Mara, look at me.
She did, her eyes wide and frightened. We're going to fix this, he said firmly. Whoever's doing this, we're going to find them and stop them. But right now, I need you to breathe. Mara took a shaky breath, then another. Some of the color returned to her face. I'm sorry, she said. Don't apologize. You're allowed to be scared. Julian pulled her into his arms, and Mara pressed her face against his chest. But we're not backing down. They want us afraid and separated. We're not giving them that. There was a knock at the door, and they pulled apart. Julian's head of security entered, his expression grim. We traced the email, he said without preamble. It came from a public library computer downtown. No way to identify who sent it without security footage, and I'm guessing whoever did this knew that. So we have nothing, Julian said flatly. Not nothing. We have a pattern. The messages, the slashed tires, now this. Whoever's behind it is escalating, but also getting sloppy. They're angry, which means they're going to make a mistake. And how many attacks do we have to endure before they make that mistake? Mara asked, her voice hard. The security chief looked at her with something like respect. I know it's not what you want to hear, but pushing them will make them act faster. If you want to draw them out... No, Julian said immediately. We're not using Mara as bait. I didn't say... That's exactly what you were about to say. Julian's voice was ice. Find another way. The man nodded and left. Mara was staring at Julian with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He said. You just shut down your own security chief for me. He was suggesting something dangerous. He was suggesting something that might work. Mara crossed her arms. Julian, if we keep reacting, we're always going to be on defense. Maybe it's time to push back. Not if it puts you at risk. I'm already at risk. We both are. Mara's jaw was set, determined. Whoever this is, they're not going to stop until we make them. So let's make them. Julian wanted to argue, wanted to lock her away somewhere safe until this was over, but he recognized that look on her face. She'd already made up her mind. What are you suggesting? He asked carefully. We go public, with us. Take away their ammunition. Mara started pacing, her mind clearly working through the angles. If we're open about the relationship, they can't threaten to expose it. And if they send that photo anywhere, we can say it's old news. We already disclosed. You want to announce we're together? To the entire company? To everyone who matters? The board? Senior leadership? HR? Mara stopped and looked at him. I know it's not ideal. I know it makes things complicated, but it's better than letting someone else control the narrative. Julian thought about it. She was right. Transparency removed power from whoever was threatening them, but it also exposed Mara to exactly the kind of speculation and judgment she'd been afraid of. Are you sure? He asked. Once we do this, we can't take it back. I'm sure. Are you? Julian crossed the room and took her face in his hands. I've never been more sure of anything. They scheduled a meeting with HR for that afternoon and drafted a formal disclosure. By 5 o'clock, the news was circulating through official channels. Julian Cross and Mara Ellis were in a relationship, effective immediately disclosed per company policy. All appropriate protocols would be followed. The response was mixed. Some people were supportive. Others were clearly skeptical. Julian received 3 calls from board members asking pointed questions about professionalism and optics. He answered each one with the same calm certainty. His personal life didn't affect his ability to run the company, and Mara's position was based entirely on merit. By the time they left the office that evening, Julian felt wrung out. That was brutal, Mara said as they walked to his car. Yeah. Any regrets? Julian looked at her, at the exhaustion in her eyes and the set of her shoulders, and the way she still held her head high despite everything they'd been through in the past week. None, he said. They drove back to his penthouse in comfortable silence. Julian's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages and emails, but he ignored all of it. When they got inside, Mara kicked off her shoes and collapsed on his couch. I need wine, she announced. I'll get it. Julian poured 2 glasses and joined her, and they sat in the dimming light watching the city come alive below them. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Then Mara's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Unknown number. Don't answer it. It might be important. Against his better judgment, Julian stayed quiet. Mara answered, putting it on speaker. Hello? A woman's voice came through, shaking and raw. Mara Ellis? Yes? Who is this? It's Serena Hathaway. I need to talk to you. Both of you, if Julian's there. Julian and Mara exchanged looks. Julian leaned forward. I'm here. What do you want, Serena? I need to meet with you, tonight. It's about the messages. Serena's voice cracked. Please, I know who's sending them. Julian felt his entire body tense. Who? Not over the phone. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe, the one on 4th Street, half an hour. There was a pause, and then Serena added, Please, Julian, this is important. I promise I'm not trying to hurt either of you. The line went dead. Mara looked at Julian. It's a trap. Probably. So we're not going. Julian stood and grabbed his keys. We're definitely going. Julian, if she knows something, we need to hear it. Even if it's a setup, at least we'll know for sure. He held out his hand. Come with me. We'll stay in public. We'll be smart. But we're going. Mara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. This is a terrible idea. Probably, but I'm tired of waiting for the next attack. They drove to the cafe in tense silence. It was a small place, the kind that stayed open late for college students and insomniacs. When they walked in, Julian spotted Serena immediately. She sat in a corner booth, her back to the wall, looking nothing like the composed bride from the wedding. Her hair was pulled back messily, and her eyes were red-rimmed. Julian and Mara slid into the booth across from her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Serena said, Thank you for coming. You said you know who's sending the messages, Julian said flatly. Talk. Serena's hands were wrapped around a cup of tea that had clearly gone cold. It's my mother. Julian felt the words hit him like a physical blow. What? My mother, Margaret. Serena's voice was hollow. I found her phone this afternoon. She'd been sloppy, hadn't cleared her messages. I saw everything. The texts to Mara, the emails. She even paid someone to slash your tires. Mara leaned forward. Why would she do that? Because she thought Julian should have fought harder for me. That he gave up too easily. Serena laughed bitterly. She's been obsessed with it since the breakup. She loved Julian. Thought he was perfect for me. When I called off the engagement, she never forgave either of us for it. So she decided to destroy any chance I had at moving on? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. She thought if she made things difficult enough, you'd give up on Mara. That you'd see it wasn't worth it. Serena finally looked up, meeting Julian's eyes. I confronted her. She admitted everything, said she was protecting our family's interests, that Mara was beneath you and someone had to make you see it. Mara went very still beside him. Julian felt rage building in his chest, white-hot and barely controlled. Where is she now? He asked. At home. I left. I couldn't. Serena's voice broke. Julian, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. I never wanted any of this. But you let it happen, Mara said, her voice cutting. You saw the messages. You knew something was going on, and you did nothing until your mother got caught. Serena flinched. You're right. I should have done more. I should have believed Julian when he called. I just didn't think my mother was capable of... She stopped, shaking her head. I'm going to the police tomorrow. I'll give them everything. Her phone, the payment records for the guy who slashed your tires, all of it. Damn right you will, Julian said. And you're going to make sure she understands that if she comes near Mara again, near either of us, I'll make her life a legal nightmare. Serena nodded miserably. I will. I promise. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Mara stood. We're done here. Julian followed her out of the cafe, and they didn't speak until they were back in the car. Then Mara turned to him, her eyes blazing. Your ex-fiancé's mother has been terrorizing us for a week because she thinks I'm not good enough for you. Yeah. That's insane. Yeah. And you're not even surprised. Julian gripped the steering wheel. Margaret always had opinions, strong ones. I just didn't think she'd cross this line. Well, she did. She crossed it so far it's not even visible anymore. Mara's voice was shaking with anger. She hired someone to sabotage my car, Julian. She took photos of us. She tried to ruin my reputation because she decided I wasn't worthy of you. I know.
Do you? Because this is what your world looks like. People who think they can manipulate and destroy whoever doesn't fit their plans. Is that what I'm signing up for? Julian turned to face her fully. No, that's what my old world looked like. The one I'm building with you is different. How can you be sure?
Because you're in it, and you don't let anyone push you around. Not Serena, not Margaret, not me. Julian reached for her hand. Mara, I can't promise this won't be complicated. My family has money and opinions and expectations, but I can promise that I will never let anyone make you feel like you're not enough. Because you're more than enough. You're everything. Mara's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them back furiously. I hate that this is happening. Me too. But I don't hate being with you. Good. Because I'm not letting you go. Mara leaned across the console and kissed him hard, desperate and relieved at once. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing heavily. Let's go home, she said. Julian started the car, and they drove back to the penthouse through the city streets, the lights blurring past them like stars. When they got inside, Mara headed straight for the bedroom, and Julian followed. They didn't talk about Margaret or Serena or what came next. They just held on to each other in the darkness, finding comfort in the simplest confirmation that they were still here, still together, still fighting for something worth having. Morning came too fast. Julian woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, and Mara still asleep beside him, one arm thrown across his chest. For a moment, he let himself just exist in that space. The warmth of her skin, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the quiet that felt like peace instead of loneliness. Then his phone started buzzing on the nightstand, shattering the moment. Julian grabbed it before it could wake Mara. 3 missed calls from his lawyer, 2 from Serena, 1 voicemail from a number he didn't recognize. He slipped out of bed carefully and took the phone into the living room. The voicemail was from Detective Chen, the officer who'd taken their report about the harassment. Julian's pulse kicked up as he listened. Mr. Cross, this is Detective Chen. We received a statement this morning from Serena Hathaway regarding her mother, Margaret Vale. Mrs. Vale has been brought in for questioning. We'll need you and Ms. Ellis to come down to the station today to give formal statements. Call me back at this number. Julian saved the message and immediately called his lawyer, David Peterson, who answered on the first ring. Tell me you didn't do anything stupid last night, David said by way of greeting. Good morning to you too. Julian, I'm serious. Serena called me at midnight saying you met with her at some cafe. Do you have any idea how that looks? She called us, said she knew who was behind the harassment. And you went running without telling anyone? Without me there? David's voice was sharp with frustration. That's exactly the kind of thing that can get twisted in court if this goes south. It was Margaret Vale, Serena's mother. She admitted everything to Serena, and Serena's giving a statement to the police today. There was a pause. Margaret Vale. The society matriarch, Margaret Vale. That's the one. David let out a long breath. This just got a lot more complicated. Her family has connections, Julian. Money. Lawyers who make me look like I'm working out of a storefront. I don't care. She terrorized Mara. She vandalized property. She hired someone to commit a crime. Julian's voice was hard. I want her prosecuted. Fully. Prosecuted, maybe. Convicted. That's going to be tougher. Women like Margaret don't usually see the inside of a cell. David was quiet for a moment. But we can make her life uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. I'll start drafting a civil suit. Harassment, emotional distress, maybe defamation depending on what those emails said. Hit her where it hurts. Her reputation and her bank account. Do it. And David, make sure she understands that if she ever comes near Mara again, the next suit will be worse. Understood. Get to the station and give your statement. And Julian, take Mara with you. United front. It matters. Julian hung up and found Mara standing in the doorway wearing one of his shirts, her hair tangled from sleep. Police station? She asked. Yeah. Serena filed the report like she promised. They want us to give statements. Mara nodded slowly, processing. This is really happening. We're actually going after her. We are, unless you've changed your mind. I haven't. She wrapped her arms around herself. Margaret Vale is a powerful woman. She sits on charity boards. She has her name on museum wings. This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly. You know what I mean? Right now it's private. Once we do this, it becomes public. People will take sides. Julian crossed the room and took her hands. Let them. Mara, I spent 2 years letting people like Margaret decide what my life should look like. I'm done with that. She doesn't get to hurt you and walk away because she has the right last name. Mara studied his face, and Julian could see her working through it. The risk, the exposure, the potential fallout. Then something in her expression hardened. Okay, she said. Let's go make her regret ever coming after us. They got dressed quickly and drove to the station in Julian's car. The building was exactly what Julian expected, bureaucratic and worn, smelling faintly of bad coffee and floor cleaner. Detective Chen met them in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Cross, Miss Ellis, thank you for coming in. She shook both their hands. We've got Margaret Vale in interview room 2. She lawyered up immediately, so we haven't been able to get much out of her. But Serena Hathaway brought us her mother's phone and some payment records. It's enough to hold her for now. What are the charges? Julian asked. Harassment, stalking, conspiracy to commit vandalism. We're still building the case, but it's solid. Chen looked between them. I need to warn you both. Mrs. Vale is claiming this is all a misunderstanding, that she was trying to protect her daughter from what she perceived as a threat to the family. A threat, Mara repeated flatly. She means me. Yes. Her lawyer's already working the angle that she was acting out of maternal concern. It won't hold up in court, but it'll play well in the media. Chen's expression was sympathetic. You should prepare for this to get messy. People like her don't go down quietly. We're prepared, Julian said. They spent the next 2 hours giving detailed statements. Every message, every incident, every moment they'd felt watched or threatened. Mara's voice stayed steady throughout, but Julian could see the strain in the set of her jaw, the way her hands clenched in her lap. When they finally walked out of the station, the afternoon sun felt too bright, the noise of the street too loud. I need food, Mara said. Real food, not protein bars or coffee, actual food. They found a diner 2 blocks away and slid into a booth near the back. Mara ordered a burger and fries without looking at the menu, and Julian did the same. When the waitress left, they sat in silence for a moment. How are you doing? Julian asked. I don't know yet. Ask me in a few days when my brain catches up to what just happened. Mara rubbed her temples. I keep thinking about Margaret sitting in that interview room. She probably hates me more now than she did before. Probably. That doesn't scare you. Terrifies me. But not enough to back down. Julian reached across the table for her hand. Mara, whatever happens next, we handle it together. That's the deal. Together, Mara repeated. She squeezed his fingers. I'm holding you to that. Their food arrived and they ate in comfortable silence. Julian watched Mara steal fries off his plate, even though she had her own, and something about the normalcy of it made his chest ache. This, sitting in a diner, sharing food, existing in the small, quiet moments, this was what he'd been missing. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just being with someone who made the ordinary feel significant. His phone buzzed, a text from Serena. Can we talk? Just you and me, please. Julian showed Mara the message. She raised an eyebrow. You going to answer? Should I? That depends. Do you want to talk to her? Julian thought about it. Part of him wanted to ignore Serena completely, to cut that last thread connecting him to a past that had caused nothing but pain, but another part, the part that remembered who they'd been before everything fell apart, felt like he owed her at least a conversation. I think I do, he said slowly. Not to fix anything, just to close the door properly. Then you should call her. Mara's voice was steady, but Julian caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I'm not going to tell you who you can or can't talk to. You're worried. A little, but I trust you. She pulled her hand back and picked up another fry. Just don't let her manipulate you into feeling guilty for moving on. That's her specialty. Julian called Serena from the car after they left the diner. She answered immediately. Julian, thank you. What do you want, Serena? To apologize, properly, not in a cafe at midnight with Mara listening, just you and me. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm asking anyway. Julian glanced at Mara, who was watching the street outside her window, deliberately giving him space. Fine. Tomorrow. 1 hour. The park near your old apartment. Thank you. I'll be there. He hung up and Mara turned to look at him. The park? Neutral ground, public, safe. Safe, Mara echoed. Right. You don't trust her. I don't trust anyone who sends their mother to do their dirty work, even if she claims she didn't know. Mara's expression was hard. But like I said, I trust you, so go. Talk to her. Get whatever closure you need. That night, they stayed in again. Julian ordered takeout, and they ate on the couch watching a movie neither of them really paid attention to. Mara fell asleep halfway through, her head on his shoulder, and Julian stayed still so he wouldn't wake her. He thought about tomorrow's meeting with Serena, about what he would say, what she might say, how it would feel to finally close that chapter. Part of him was dreading it. Part of him felt like it was long overdue. The next afternoon, Julian left Mara at the penthouse and drove to the park alone. It was the same place where he and Serena used to walk on Sunday mornings, back when they were still pretending their relationship could survive the weight of their differences. Serena was already there, sitting on a bench near the fountain. She looked smaller than Julian remembered, diminished somehow. When she saw him approach, she stood up quickly. Hi. Hi. Julian stayed standing, keeping distance between them. You wanted to talk, so talk. Serena flinched at his tone but didn't back down. I'm sorry, for all of it. For my mother, for the wedding invitation, for not protecting you the way I should have. You didn't protect me at all, Serena. You threw me away and then expected me to show up and celebrate you marrying someone else. I know. I know that now. She wrapped her arms around herself. Julian, when I ended things between us, I told myself it was because we wanted different things, that you were too focused on work, too closed off emotionally. But that wasn't the whole truth. Then what was? Serena's eyes filled with tears. The truth is you terrified me. The way you loved, it was so much, so intense. You didn't just care about me, you consumed yourself with caring. And I didn't know how to handle that, so I convinced myself you were the problem, that if you could just be a little less, we'd be fine. Julian felt something crack in his chest. You made me believe I was too much, that my feelings were wrong. I did, and I'm so sorry. Serena's voice broke. I spent 2 years telling myself I made the right choice, that Marcus was easier, safer. But watching you at the wedding with Mara, seeing the way you looked at her, I realized you were never too much. I was just not enough, not brave enough to handle loving someone like you. The words landed like stones in still water. Julian had spent so long believing that Serena was right, that he needed to be less of himself to be lovable. Hearing her admit she'd been wrong should have felt vindicating. Instead, it just felt sad. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because you deserve to know. And because I see you building something with Mara, and I don't want my voice in your head telling you to hold back. She's not afraid of you the way I was. Don't punish her for my weakness. Julian looked at Serena, really looked at her, and saw someone who was genuinely trying to make amends. It didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the 2 years he'd spent questioning himself. But it was something. I appreciate you saying that, he said finally. But Serena, I need you to understand something. Whatever we had, it's over. Not just ended, completely gone. I don't hate you, but I don't love you anymore either. And your mother trying to destroy my relationship with Mara, that's unforgivable. I know. I've already cut her off, no contact until she gets help. Serena wiped her eyes. I told her if she ever goes near you or Mara again, I'll testify against her myself. Good. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Serena said, She's lucky, you know, Mara. I'm the lucky one. That too. Serena managed a small smile. Take care of yourself, Julian. You too. He walked away without looking back, and this time it didn't hurt. It just felt like closing a door that should have been closed a long time ago. When Julian got back to the penthouse, he found Mara at his kitchen counter with her laptop open, surrounded by papers. She looked up when he walked in. How'd it go? It went. Julian set his keys down and crossed to her. She apologized for everything, said I wasn't too much. She was just too scared to handle how I loved. Mara's expression softened. How do you feel about that? Like I wasted 2 years believing her version of me instead of trusting my own. Julian pulled Mara to her feet and wrapped his arms around her. But I'm done with that now, done making myself smaller. Good, because I like you exactly the size you are. Mara kissed him softly, big feelings and all. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the afternoon light. Then Mara pulled back slightly. I need to tell you something, she said.
and you're not going to like it.
Julian's stomach dropped.
What? I got an email an hour ago from a reporter. They want to do a story about Margaret Vale's arrest, and they're asking for a comment from both of us. Mara bit her lip. Julian, this is going to be news. Not just business news, actual tabloid news. They're going to dig into our relationship, your history with Serena, everything. Julian felt the familiar weight of dread settle in his chest. When does the story run?
Tomorrow morning. I already called your PR team. They're drafting a statement.
What kind of statement? The truth. That we're together, that Margaret harassed us, and that we're pursuing legal action. Mara's hands tightened on his arms. Julian, this is going to get invasive. They're going to follow us, take photos, speculate about every detail of our lives. Are you ready for that?
He thought about everything they'd been through in the past 2 weeks. The threats, the harassment, the constant feeling of being watched. Going public would just amplify all of it, put them under a microscope they couldn't escape. But it would also take away the power of secrecy. Once everything was out in the open, there was nothing left to threaten them with. I'm ready, he said. As long as you are. I'm terrified, but I'm ready too. The story broke the next morning exactly as Mara had predicted. The headline read, Society matriarch arrested in harassment campaign against son-in-law's new girlfriend. The article included photos of Julian and Mara leaving the police station. Quotes from anonymous sources claiming Margaret had been devastated by Serena's broken engagement, and speculation about the timeline of Julian and Mara's relationship. Julian's phone started ringing before 7 a.m. His mother, his brother, board members. Old friends he hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly concerned about his well-being. He ignored most of them and focused on the one call that mattered, David Peterson. Well, you're famous, David said dryly. How does it feel? Like being stripped naked in public. Get used to it. This is going to be the story for at least a week. Maybe more if Margaret's lawyers push back hard. David's tone became serious. Julian, I need you to be smart about this. No confrontations with reporters, no off-the-cuff statements. Everything goes through me and your PR team. Understood? Understood. And Mara? How's she holding up? Julian looked across the room to where Mara was sitting on the couch, her own phone in hand, scrolling through what he assumed were similar articles. Her face was pale, but composed. She's tougher than anyone gives her credit for, Julian said. Good. She's going to need to be. The next few days were brutal. Reporters camped outside Julian's building. His office was flooded with media requests. Mara's photo appeared in tabloids with headlines speculating about whether she was a gold digger or a home wrecker, completely ignoring the fact that Julian and Serena had been broken up for 2 years. Through it all, Mara stayed steady. She went to work, did her job, and refused to hide. When reporters shouted questions at her in the parking garage, she walked past them without flinching. When a particularly vicious gossip blog ran a piece questioning her qualifications, she forwarded it to HR with a request that they issue a formal statement about her credentials. Julian fell a little more in love with her every day. On Friday evening, they were sitting in Julian's living room trying to pretend they had normal lives when Mara's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Detective Chen, she answered on speaker. Hello? Ms. Ellis, Mr. Cross, I wanted to give you an update. Margaret Vale posted bail this afternoon. Julian felt his entire body go rigid. She's out? For now. There's a restraining order in place. She can't contact either of you directly or come within 500 feet. But yes, she's out. Chen's voice was apologetic. Her lawyers are pushing for a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for probation and mandatory counseling. No, Julian said immediately. We want this to go to trial. Mr. Cross, I understand you're angry, but trials are unpredictable. Margaret's lawyers are good. There's a real chance she could walk with nothing more than a fine. And if we take the plea deal? She gets probation, mandatory therapy, and a permanent record. Plus, you can still pursue civil charges. Chen paused. It's not perfect, but it's something. Julian looked at Mara. She was staring at her phone, her jaw tight. Can we think about it? Mara asked. You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires and we go to trial. Chen's tone softened. For what it's worth, I think you should take it. Margaret's going to spend the rest of her life explaining why she was arrested for stalking. That's not nothing. They thanked her and hung up. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mara said, I want her to suffer. Me too. But Chen's right. A trial could drag on for months, more media attention, more invasive questions, and at the end of it, we might get nothing. Julian reached for her hand. What do you want to do? Mara was quiet for a long time, thinking it through. Then she said, I want to take the deal. Not because I forgive her, but because I'm tired of letting her take up space in our lives. I want to move on. Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. She squeezed his fingers. Let's take the deal, file the civil suit, and make sure she never forgets what it cost her to come after us. And then let's just live our lives. Julian pulled her into his arms, and Mara pressed her face against his chest. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other against the weight of everything they'd survived.
2 days later, they accepted the plea deal. Margaret Vale pleaded guilty to harassment and stalking, received 2 years probation, and was ordered to attend mandatory counseling. The civil suit David filed on their behalf asked for $2 million in damages, an amount specifically calculated to hurt without destroying. The media coverage continued for another week, then gradually faded as newer scandals replaced theirs. Julian's board issued a statement of support. Mara's colleagues stopped whispering when she walked into rooms. Slowly, life began to feel almost normal again. One Saturday morning, Julian woke to find Mara already up, standing at the windows in one of his t-shirts, coffee in hand. Hey, he said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. How long have you been up? An hour maybe, I was thinking. About? About what comes next. We've been in crisis mode for weeks. But that's over now. Margaret's dealt with. The media's moved on. So what happens when life gets boring? Julian turned her to face him. You think we only work in crisis? I don't know. Do we? There's only one way to find out. Julian kissed her forehead. Let's try boring and see what happens. Mara smiled, and Julian felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for as long as he could remember. Whatever came next, boring or chaotic, easy or impossible, they would face it together. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Boring turned out to be harder than either of them expected. The first week after the plea deal felt strange, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Julian kept checking his phone for threatening messages that never came. Mara flinched every time a car door slammed outside. They were so used to being under siege that peace felt suspicious, unearned. But slowly, life began to find its rhythm. Julian went to work and came home at reasonable hours. Mara cooked dinner sometimes, and sometimes they ordered in. They watched movies and argued about which streaming service had better content. They existed in the small, unremarkable moments that made up actual relationships instead of crisis management. 3 weeks after the plea deal, Julian's mother invited them both to dinner. She's going to interrogate me, Mara said, staring at the text message with barely concealed dread. Your mother is going to ask me 1,000 questions and judge every single answer. Probably, Julian admitted, but she'll do it politely. My mother's very committed to appearing civilized. That's not reassuring. She also liked Serena, and look how that turned out. Her judgment isn't infallible. Mara looked at him sharply. That's supposed to make me feel better? Julian pulled her close. My mother's opinion doesn't matter. Not really. The only thing that matters is what we think of each other. Easy for you to say. She's not your boyfriend's mother. True. But Mara, you faced down Margaret Vale. You survived tabloid reporters and harassment campaigns and death threats. My mother asking about your career plans should be nothing. Your mother is scarier than all of those things combined. Julian laughed despite himself. Fair point. They drove to his mother's house on Saturday evening, a sprawling estate in Connecticut that Julian had grown up in and never felt comfortable returning to. Too many memories of his father's expectations and his mother's careful social maneuvering. Too many dinner parties where he'd been paraded around like evidence of good breeding. His mother, Catherine Cross, met them at the door wearing pearls and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was elegant in the way wealthy women often were, perfectly maintained, perfectly composed, perfectly unreadable. Julian, darling, she kissed his cheek, and you must be Mara. I've heard so much about you. Mrs. Cross, thank you for having me. Mara's voice was steady, professional, the same tone she used in boardrooms. Please, call me Catherine. Come in, both of you. The house smelled like expensive candles and fresh flowers. Catherine led them through rooms that looked like museum exhibits, beautiful but untouched, designed for appearance rather than living. Julian felt Mara's hand tighten on his arm. Your home is lovely, Mara said. Thank you. It's far too large for just me now, but I can't bring myself to downsize. Too many memories. Catherine gestured to the dining room. Please sit. Dinner will be ready shortly. They sat at a table that could easily accommodate 12 people. Julian took the seat beside Mara, a small act of solidarity that his mother noticed with a raised eyebrow. So Mara, Julian tells me you've been working with him for over a year now. 18 months. I started as his executive assistant. And now? Now I'm still his executive assistant, though we've disclosed our relationship to HR and the board, so everything is above board. Catherine's smile was thin. How modern. In my day, such relationships were considered inappropriate regardless of disclosure. Times change, Mara said evenly. Indeed they do. Catherine poured wine with practiced grace. Tell me about your family. Where are you from? Julian felt the conversation shift into interrogation mode. His mother had a way of asking questions that sounded casual, but were actually designed to extract maximum information with minimum effort. I grew up in Philadelphia, Mara said. My father was a teacher. My mother worked in healthcare administration. How nice. And they're still there? My father is. My mother passed away 6 years ago. Catherine's expression softened fractionally. I'm sorry for your loss. That must have been difficult. It was, but it taught me to value the relationships I have while I have them. Julian watched his mother process this answer, saw her recalibrating. Mara wasn't playing the game the way Catherine expected. She wasn't trying to impress or defer or perform. She was just being honest. Dinner arrived, some elaborate dish Julian couldn't identify, and they ate while Catherine asked more questions. About Mara's education, her career goals, her thoughts on Julian's work. Each answer Mara gave was direct and unadorned, refusing to be drawn into the performance Catherine clearly expected. Finally, Catherine set down her fork and looked directly at Mara. You're not what I expected. What were you expecting? I'm not entirely sure. Someone more ambitious, perhaps. Someone who saw Julian as a stepping stone. I don't need Julian to advance my career, Mara said quietly. I'm good at what I do on my own merits. Being with him just means I get to be good at what I do while also being with someone who makes me happy. Catherine studied her for a long moment. Then she turned to Julian. You care about her. I love her, Julian said. The words came out easier than he expected. I'm in love with her, actually. Completely. Mara's head turned sharply, her eyes wide. They hadn't said it yet, not out loud, not in those exact words. They danced around it, implied it, shown it in 1,000 small ways. But Julian hadn't actually spoken the words until now. His mother noticed the reaction, and something in her expression shifted. You didn't know. No, Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't. Catherine stood abruptly. I think I'll get dessert. You two clearly need a moment. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Julian and Mara alone at the absurdly large table. You love me, Mara said. Yeah. You just announced it in front of your mother before telling me first. I know. Bad timing. The worst timing. But Mara was smiling, her eyes bright. You really love me? Julian reached for her hand. I really love you. I've loved you for weeks now. Maybe longer. I just didn't know how to say it without it sounding like some declaration from a romance novel. So you decided to say it at your mother's dinner table instead. Apparently. Mara laughed, and the sound filled something hollow in Julian's chest. You're ridiculous. I know. I love you too, just so you know. Julian felt his entire world narrow to just her face, her hand in his, the impossible reality that this brilliant, fierce woman loved him back. Say it again. I love you, Julian Cross. Even though you have terrible timing and you announced it in the worst possible setting, he kissed her, not caring that his mother could walk back in at any moment. Mara kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his face, and Julian felt like he could finally breathe properly for the first time in years. When they pulled apart, Catherine was standing in the doorway with a tray of desserts, looking oddly pleased with herself. Well, she said, setting the tray down. That's settled then. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Catherine's questions became less probing and more genuinely curious. By the time they left, Julian's mother actually hugged Mara at the door, a gesture she rarely extended to anyone outside immediate family. In the car, Mara turned to Julian. Did I just pass some kind of test? I think you might have. Your mother is terrifying. She liked you. Trust me, if she didn't, she would have been much scarier. Mara shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe you told me you loved me in front of her. Would you have preferred somewhere else? I would have preferred somewhere private, maybe with candles, definitely not at your mother's dining table. Julian pulled her close. I'll make it up to you. You better. He did make it up to her later that night, with actual candles and wine and all the words he'd been holding back for weeks. They talked until the early morning hours, about everything and nothing, about the future they were building and the past they were leaving behind. A month later, Serena called. Julian almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hi, Serena said. She sounded different, smaller, less certain. I know I shouldn't be calling, but I wanted you to know that Marcus and I are separating. Julian felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's the right thing. We got married for the wrong reasons, and we both knew it. She was quiet for a moment. I think I called because I wanted to thank you. For what? For not fighting for me. When I ended things, you let me go. At the time, I told myself it proved you didn't really love me. But I realize now that you loved me enough to let me make my own choices, even when they hurt you. Julian thought about that version of himself, the one who'd watched Serena walk away and had believed it was his fault. He barely recognized that person anymore. I did love you, Serena, but I don't think we ever really understood each other. No, we didn't. She took a shaky breath. I saw the photos of you and Mara, the ones from that charity gala last week. Julian, you look happy, actually happy. Not performing it or pretending, just happy. I am. Good, that's good. Serena's voice cracked slightly. I think that's what I was really afraid of. Not that you'd love someone else, but that you'd love them better than you loved me. And you do. I can see it. Julian didn't know what to say to that. The truth was complicated. He had loved Serena, deeply and completely, in the way you love someone when you're young and still figuring out who you are. But what he felt for Mara was different. It was built on actually knowing each other, seeing each other's flaws, and choosing to stay anyway. I hope you find that too, he said finally, with someone who isn't afraid of how much you feel. Maybe. Someday. Serena laughed softly. Take care of yourself, Julian, and thank you for being kind. You didn't have to be, after everything my mother did. Yeah, I did. Being angry at you wouldn't have changed anything. They said goodbye, and this time Julian knew it was final. Whatever connection had existed between them was truly gone now, dissolved into the past where it belonged. That night, he told Mara about the call. She listened quietly, her head resting on his shoulder. How do you feel? She asked. Relieved, mostly. Like I can finally stop carrying around who I used to be when I was with her. You were never that person. Not really. You were just trying to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. Julian pulled back to look at her. You really believe that? I know that. Julian, the man I fell in love with isn't some edited version of yourself. He's the one who feels too much and works too hard and gets protective over people he cares about. That's who you actually are. Serena just couldn't handle it. And you can? I don't just handle it, I love it. I love that you feel things deeply, that you commit completely, that when you care about something, you go all in. Mara's hand traced his jawline. You were never too much. You were just with someone who wanted you to be less. And I will never ask you to be less than everything you are. Julian felt his throat go tight. How did I get this lucky? You went to your ex's wedding and asked your assistant to be your date. It was a terrible plan that somehow worked out. He laughed and kissed her, and Mara kissed him back with the kind of certainty that still amazed him. After everything they'd been through, the harassment, the media attention, the constant feeling of being under attack, they'd somehow come out the other side stronger instead of broken. 6 months after the plea deal, David Peterson called with news about the civil suit. Margaret Vale had agreed to settle for the full amount rather than go to trial. $2 million paid out over 5 years, with a signed agreement that she would never contact Julian or Mara again. She caved, David said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Her lawyers recommended fighting, but she decided it wasn't worth the continued publicity. Apparently her social standing has taken enough of a hit already. Julian thanked him and hung up. When he told Mara, she went very quiet. $2 million, she said finally. Yeah, that's a lot of money. It is. What do you want to do with your half? Mara looked at him in surprise. My half? It's as much your settlement as mine. Probably more, actually. You bore the brunt of her harassment. Julian, I don't want money from this. I just wanted her to face consequences. She did. And now she's paying for what she did. Literally. Julian sat down beside her. Mara, do something good with it. Donate it. Start a foundation. Use it to help other people who've been harassed. Whatever you want. But don't refuse it just because it came from something painful. Mara thought about it for a long time. Then she said, Okay, but I'm not deciding alone. We decide together. They spent weeks researching organizations that supported harassment victims, eventually choosing 3 different nonprofits to split Mara's portion between. Julian donated his half to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, something he'd been thinking about since Mara had mentioned her father scraping together tuition money for her education. The money didn't erase what had happened, but it felt like taking something ugly and turning it into something that mattered. A year after the wedding that started everything, Julian woke up to find Mara already awake, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He said. Nothing. Just thinking. About? About how different my life is now compared to a year ago. Mara's fingers traced idle patterns on his chest. A year ago, I was your assistant who thought you were brilliant and intimidating and completely out of reach. Now I'm lying in your bed talking about what to have for breakfast. Profound stuff. She swatted his arm. I'm being serious. So am I. It is profound. A year ago I was broken. Now I'm not. You were never broken. I felt broken. That's what matters. Julian caught her hand and brought it to his lips. Serena made me believe that wanting connection was weakness, that needing someone meant I was incomplete. You showed me that's not true. That needing someone and being strong enough to admit it, that's actually the bravest thing you can do. Mara's eyes went soft. When did you get so good with words? I've always been good with words. You just bring out the honest ones. They lay there for a while longer, tangled together in the morning light. Julian thought about everything that had changed, the way he approached work now, leaving the office at reasonable hours because going home to Mara mattered more than another late night. The way he'd started painting again, filling a corner of his penthouse with canvases and supplies. The way his life had become less about achievement and more about actually living. Move in with me, he said suddenly. Mara lifted her head. What? Move in. Officially. You're here most nights anyway. Let's stop pretending you have another apartment. Julian, I know it's fast. I know we said we'd be careful. But Mara, I don't want careful anymore. I want you here all the time. I want to wake up with you every morning and come home to you every night. I want this to be our space, not just mine. Mara searched his face, and Julian could see her working through it. The risk, the vulnerability, the terrifying leap of committing fully. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, let's do it. Let's be reckless and move too fast and not care what anyone thinks. Julian kissed her, and Mara laughed against his mouth, and for a moment everything felt impossibly simple and impossibly right. Moving Mara's things into the penthouse took 2 weekends and multiple debates about what furniture to keep and what to donate. Her books filled his empty shelves. Her plants took over the windowsills. Her coffee mugs crowded his cabinets. The penthouse that had felt like an expensive hotel room slowly transformed into a home. One evening, about a month after Mara officially moved in, they hosted dinner for Julian's brother David and his wife. It was chaotic and loud and nothing like the formal dinners Julian had endured with Serena. They ordered too much food and drank too much wine and stayed up too late arguing about politics and movies and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. After David and his wife left, Julian and Mara cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in the easy synchronization of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Your brother likes me, Mara said, loading the dishwasher. Of course he does. Everyone likes you. Not everyone. Margaret definitely doesn't. Margaret doesn't count as people. Mara laughed and threw a dish towel at him. Julian caught it and pulled her close, and they swayed together in the kitchen like they were dancing to music only they could hear. I like this, Mara said quietly. The boring parts. Coming home and making dinner and cleaning up after friends. I spent so long thinking relationships had to be dramatic to be real. But this feels more real than anything I've ever had. That's because it is real. We're not performing for anyone. We're just living. Just living, Mara echoed. I like that. They finished cleaning and moved to the couch, where Mara curled up against Julian's side like she'd been doing it for years. He thought about all the versions of himself he'd been. The one who tried to make himself smaller for Serena. The one who threw himself into work to avoid feeling anything. The one who showed up at that wedding, convinced he had something to prove. None of those versions had been wrong, exactly. They'd just been incomplete. Steps on the path to becoming someone who could be with Mara and not feel like he had to hide or perform or constantly justify his existence. "Thank you," he said. Mara looked up at him. "For what?" "For seeing me, the real me, not the version I thought I was supposed to be." "Julian, I didn't do anything special. I just paid attention." "That's everything, though. Serena spent 2 years with me and never really saw me. You saw me in 18 months. That's not nothing." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think sometimes people only see what they want to see. Serena wanted you to be easier, so she only saw the parts of you that were difficult. But I wanted to understand you, so I saw everything. The good parts and the messy parts and the parts you tried to hide. And you still wanted to be with me, even after seeing all of it." "Especially after seeing all of it." Mara shifted to face him properly. "Julian, you're not perfect. You work too hard sometimes. You get in your head and forget to talk about what you're feeling. You have this tendency to try to fix everything instead of just sitting with problems. But those things don't make me love you less. They just make you human." Julian felt something settle in his chest, some last piece of uncertainty finally finding its place. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. You asked me to a wedding and then you kept choosing me. Every single day since then you've chosen me. That's what you did." He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring every bit of gratitude and love and wonder into it. Mara kissed him back with the same intensity, and Julian thought about how far they'd come from that first night at the wedding when everything had been performance and pretending. This was real, messy and imperfect, and sometimes difficult, but real. And real was so much better than perfect could ever be. 2 years after the wedding, Julian proposed. Not at some elaborate restaurant or planned event, but on a random Tuesday evening when they were both home early and Mara was wearing sweatpants and one of his old t-shirts. She was reading on the couch, and Julian looked at her and realized he didn't want to wait for the perfect moment, because this was the perfect moment, ordinary and unremarkable and completely them. "Marry me," he said. Mara looked up from her book. "What?" "Marry me. I don't have a ring yet. I'll get you whatever ring you want, but Mara, I don't want to wait for the right time or the right setting. I just want you to know that I want to spend the rest of my life doing exactly this, coming home to you, building a life with you, being completely and imperfectly ourselves together." Mara set down her book slowly. "You're proposing to me in the living room." "I am. I'm wearing sweatpants. I noticed. This is possibly the least romantic proposal in history." "Probably. Is that a no?" Mara's face broke into a smile that made Julian's chest ache. "That's a yes. Obviously that's a yes." She launched herself at him, and Julian caught her, and they tumbled onto the couch in a tangle of limbs and laughter. When they finally pulled apart, Mara's eyes were bright with tears. "We're getting married," she said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "We're getting married," Julian confirmed. "Your mother is going to have opinions about the wedding." "My mother has opinions about everything. We'll ignore most of them. Your ex-fiancée is married to someone else, and probably happy about it." "Good. She deserves to be happy, just like we deserve to be happy." Mara cupped his face in her hands. "I love you. Even when you propose without warning in the middle of a Tuesday. I love you too. Even when you steal all the blankets and leave me freezing. I do not steal the blankets." "You absolutely steal the blankets." They argued about it playfully, the way they argued about everything, with humor and affection and the deep certainty that they were on the same team. And Julian thought about how he'd spent so long believing he was too much, too intense, too difficult to love properly. How Serena had reinforced that belief until he'd almost accepted it as truth. But Mara had shown him something different. That being loved didn't mean making yourself smaller or hiding the parts of you that felt too big. It meant finding someone who saw all of you, the brilliance and the flaws, the strength and the vulnerability, and chose you anyway. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And real, messy, imperfect love was the only kind worth having. The wedding happened 6 months later, small and intimate in his mother's garden with only the people who truly mattered in attendance. Julian's brother served as best man. Mara's father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Catherine Cross cried quietly in the front row, and later told Julian that Mara was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Serena sent a gift, a set of paintbrushes and a note that said simply, "Be happy." Julian looked at Mara in her simple white dress, at the way the afternoon sun caught in her hair, at the smile on her face that was just for him. And he thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain and growth and hard-won understanding that loving someone meant showing up as yourself instead of who you thought you should be. When the officiant asked if he took Mara to be his wife, Julian said, "I do," and meant it with every part of himself. When Mara said the same words back to him, Julian felt something complete inside him, not because he'd been incomplete before, but because he'd finally found someone who understood that completeness didn't mean perfection. It meant being whole enough to share yourself with another person and trust them to handle what you gave them with care. They danced under the stars as the evening stretched into night, and Julian held Mara close and thought about how strange and wonderful it was that pain could transform into joy if you were brave enough to let it. That letting someone in wasn't weakness, it was the most courageous thing you could do. That love wasn't about finding someone who made you feel safe from hurt. It was about finding someone who made hurt feel survivable because you were facing it together. And as Mara laughed at something his brother said, and Julian watched her with wonder still fresh after 2 years, he realized that this was what happiness actually looked like. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of someone who made difficulty bearable. Someone who saw you clearly and loved you anyway. Someone who turned the ordinary moments into something extraordinary just by being there. Julian Cross had spent 2 years believing he was broken beyond repair, but standing in his mother's garden with Mara's hand in his, he understood that he'd never been broken at all. He'd just been waiting to find someone brave enough to love the real him instead of the version he thought he was supposed to be. And Mara Ellis, his brilliant, fierce, completely unimpressed assistant turned wife, had been brave enough to see him and choose him and build a life with him that was messy and real and perfectly imperfect, which was exactly what both of them had needed all along.